Sunday, December 9th, 2018. Hello and good morning to Harold, Smoky Simon.
Nice to see you and Uri.
I want to start by asking you, when and where were you born?
I was born in South Africa 98 and a half years ago. And if I can just enlarge a bit, after and that's when I was engaged to get married at that time, and I told my future wife that we would have to postpone our wedding because I was going to Palestine. And she said, but I'm also going to Palestine. She too had served in the South African Air Force in World War II. And so we married in a bit of a rush, and we came over in the first group of South African volunteers to assist our brothers in the War of Independence.
Before your Aliyah story and your Mahal story and War of Independence, I want to ask you a little bit about your roots, your origin, your parents. Where exactly did you grow up in South Africa?
I really grew up in a small town by the name of Winburg. And after matriculating, that's when I went to university. I worked and studied at the same time. I served what we call articles of clerkship with a firm of accountants and auditors. And I finished with 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Commerce and a Chartered Accountant. And then really what happened was when I wrote my last examination, I put down my pen and I joined the South African Air Force in January 1941.
At the same day you graduated, you finished your last exam?
Exactly. I put down my pen because we did not have conscription in South Africa. It was all voluntary who entered the army because of the political divide between the English and the Afrikaans part of the population. So I was trained as a navigator bombardier. I served for 5 years in the Air Force, from January 41 to the end of 1945. After the war, like all servicemen, I was trying to rehabilitate myself. And then, as I said, when we saw the war clouds gathering over Palestine, we changed course and came over as Machanikim. We arrived in Palestine on the 9th of May 1948. We signed on for the Air Force on the 10th of May. And on the 14th of May, Ben-Gurion declared the state of Israel. And I had a rather unique experience on that day. The army gave an order to the Air Force to do a reconnaissance over Jordan, because Jordan was the first Arab country to attack Israel. They actually attacked on the 14th of May. and it was a rather unique experience. The pilot was Boris Senior, who was a very well-known mechanik. I was the navigator, and we had an Israeli aerial photographer.
Shmulik Vedelis.
Shmulik, exactly. And so what was unique about it, that when we took off from Dom on the flight, we left, it was still Palestine. But when we came back from the flight, it was already Israel, because the state of Israel was declared by Ben-Gurion at that very time on Friday, the 14th of May.
It was your first flight, I guess.
And that was the first operational flight of Hayavir.
You just arrived, so it was your first flight also.
Yeah, it was my first flight and the first flight of the Air Force. The first operational flight of the Air Force.
How did you physically, your wife and yourself, how did you get here? By boat, by plane?
No,
from South Africa?
We came by plane. It was, the company was called Pan-African Charter. And it was really owned by 3 Jewish gentlemen in South Africa. It was quite a long trip because there were hold-ups in the Sudan and so forth across Africa. And we arrived in Cyprus. And before leaving Cyprus, the pilot said, you know, I can't fly to Palestine. They're fighting at Lydda Airport, and I cannot risk my passengers and my airplane. I was, as it were, the leader of our group at the time, and I said, look, but we've got a contract. You've got to get us to Palestine. So they arranged with a Cypriot airline who said, we will take you only to Haifa. We said, that's fine. Get us to Haifa. And that's where we landed. And at the time, the British were evacuating because the mandate was due to end at midnight of the 14th and 15th of May. The airfield at Haifa was swarming with British military, police and so forth, because bear in mind, there were over 80,000 British troops in Palestine.
And they didn't finish their evacuation at the 14th of May. They stayed for
that's also correct. Yeah. And we had some secret documents which my wife put in her underwear for Ben-Gurion. We didn't know the contents, of course, but we were worried in case the British police interrogated us and maybe searched us, but everything passed off b'shekhet. And so we signed up for service with Hayavir on the 10th of May. And as I said, on the 14th of May, that was my first flight and the first flight of the Air Force.
Why did you get and how did you get the nickname Smoky?
It's really not a very romantic story, but when we were doing elementary training in the South African Air Force, we played a game, softball. It's almost like baseball. And I happened to hit a very good shot, and one guy called out, "Great shot, Smoky Joe from the Kokomo." And I've had that nickname for 71 years. or 77.
So it's sport. It's sport. It's sportive.
Yeah,
Comes from sport game.
that's right.
Who were your parents, and where did they come from before moving to South Africa? The origin of the family.
You know that the South African Jewish community was made up mainly of Litvaks, Lithuanians. My late father came from Lithuania. My mother really came from England, but her family migrated from London to South Africa, to Cape Town. So my father was a Litvak, and my mother had English background.
What were their names?
My late father was Solomon Shlomo, and my late mother was Alice Aliza.
What did they do for a living in South Africa?
You know, most of the European immigrants to South Africa got involved in business one way or another. And then usually what happened that new immigrants to South Africa already had a member of the family in South Africa, say, and then they took whatever jobs they could get. Really, it was, they weren't exactly refugees, but they had to start afresh. New life, new culture, new environment. And so my father he worked for one of his brothers in a shop, and then he opened his own little business, and he later on did a little bit of farming as well. And that is really how many of the immigrants started their new life in South Africa. It was a very tolerant country. Very little anti-Semitism, and really it gave these immigrants, especially from Europe, a chance to set themselves up, and then of course their children got an education in South Africa, became professional men or businessmen or whatever the case may be.
And there's another side of it. It's not trivial, the fact that you came here in 1948, the way you came here with your marriage, quick marriage story.
And a honeymoon.
And honeymoon.
Honeymoon.
And the next question is, of course, what was the attitude in your home towards Zionism and Eretz Israel?
Yeah. Now, the South African Jewish community was very much Zionist orientated. And when it seemed that a war was inevitable, the South African Zionist Federation did a wonderful job. They got in touch with the ex-servicemen, and they said, guys, we've got to support Israel. And you know, it wasn't very easy because the ex-servicemen from World War II were really just beginning to establish themselves.
Starting life.
That's right. You know, I had 5 years in the Air Force, and then you got to get back to a normal routine, which is not so easy. But the South African Zionist Federation, as I said, they had such a spirited attitude. We've got to help the Jews in Palestine. War is inevitable. And the guys rallied. Interestingly enough, there were Sahakol 4,800 Maholiks who came from 59 countries. And South Africa, which had a relatively small community, about 120,000 souls, men, women and children. But we had 832 Maholiks from South Africa. And in fact, it was the largest single contribution of the different Jewish communities. America had a little less than that. Of course, they had some men of tremendous stature who came through, which we can talk about presently.
Why did you join the flight course during World War II? Who asked you to do that?
An interesting question. The Nazis in Germany really started in the 1930s, in the early 30s. And then Hitler, of course, rose to power. And a number of German Jewish refugees came to South Africa to get out of Germany. And in the course of whilst I was studying and my work, I met quite a number of these German Jews who came to South Africa. And when I heard the stories of the persecution of the Jews in Germany and Kristallnacht in 1938, I developed a tremendous hostility to the Germans. And so when World War II broke out, as a matter of fact, I even volunteered in 1940. But the government in South Africa took an interesting decision. They said that no student in his final year would be permitted to join up. So that's why I said the moment I finished writing my last exam, I went into the Air Force. And it was really, I had built up such an hostility to the Germans and to the Nazis and what was happening that what really motivated me to serve in the Air Force.
Did you choose to become a navigator? Didn't you prefer to be a combat pilot?
Yeah, I really had hoped to be a combat pilot. I didn't make the grade for the pilot's course, and I immediately went on to the navigator's course, and I got the training as a what we call a navigated bombardier, and I served in that role in the Air Force. I had in the South African Air Force. I had a short spell with the Royal Air Force. What happened was, in the Western Desert, in the fight against Rommel, the Desert Fox, as we call him, the point that I really want to make there is that you know, now the navigators, of course, they do a wonderful job in the F-16s and so on. But in our day, we really had what we call a bomb sight. And also when we used to fly at night, we used to do astronavigation with the stars and so forth.
Classic navigation.
Yeah. We called it astronavigation at night. And so I really spent my flying career first in Bomber Command and then in Coastal Command. In Coastal Command, it was hunting the German U-boats, their submarines, escorting our convoys of troops being transferred all over the place, doing naval reconnaissance. And so I had my first operation in Bomber Command and my second operation in Coastal Command.
What kind of warplanes were you using?
In Bomber Command, we flew light bombers. There were Bostons and Baltimores.
American?
Yeah, American. And in Coastal Command, we flew the Catalinas, which were American, and the Sunderland, which was a very big plane, which was British.
What was your course of war geographically? Where have you been stationed?
Yeah. We did the OTU, the Operational Training Unit, in Kenya. It was really a very bad period. It was a big mistake to set up the OTU in Kenya because of Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. And the clouds used to build up into levels of 10,000 feet. And a number of guys got killed flying into the mountains. When we finished the OTU for 3 months from Kenya, I was posted to Bomber Command in the Western Desert.
Libya or?
Well, it really started off in Egypt. And you may remember that there was the great Battle of El Alamein. El Alamein was the first serious victory that the Allied forces had in World War II. It's interesting that when the war broke out in September 1939, El Alamein was 3 years later in October 1942. It took the Allies 3 years to really make their first significant victory. And then when the Germans were beaten at El Alamein and they started withdrawing, then into Libya, then into Tunisia, then into Sicilia, and then into Italy. And my tour of operations finished when we were in Sicily, just before my squadron went on to Italy. So we really covered the area in Egypt and Libya and Tunisia and Malta and Sicilia, Sicily. And then I had a month off-ish, and then I was posted to Coastal Command. So that was really my personal background, and you know, the great advantage that Israel had was when the Machniks came over really at a very critical time and brought to them this invaluable asset, war experience.
Before becoming Mahal and part of your background, there's a question of the closer to the end of the war, I guess. Have you met Holocaust survivors in Europe?
Now, bear in mind, you know, during the war, we had no idea about the Holocaust. It was after the war. And of course, after the war, Holocaust survivors and displaced persons were looking to Palestine as a refuge after the hell of Europe. And then, of course, there was a big problem we had with the British, their naval blockade, which stopped Jews from coming into Palestine. Holocaust survivors, displaced persons. And then there was a Machteret, the Irgun Zwailumi, and the Lehi, fighting the British against their policy of blocking Jews who've been through the hell of Europe coming to a place of refuge. So, so I think, to answer your question, I would say that we were totally unaware of the Holocaust during the war. It was only after the war that the news really came out of what the Germans and their accomplices in Poland and Lithuania and all these countries did to the Jewish people.
Did the South African aircrew members knew each other before they joined the Israeli Air Force? People like Boris Sr., Eddie Cohen, Sid Kentridge, Hugo Alperstein, and others. Did they knew each other before?
We
were
knew,
part of a group.
You know, the South African Jews who served in the Air Force, you know, it was, bear in mind that the war was really over a period of 6 years, from September 39 to the end of 45. Now, Sid Cohen, for example, whom I knew, he had already started serving. It was his first year at medical school. So he left medical school and he then started fighting in Abyssinia against the Italians in 1940. We knew, now you see, Sid, for example, was in fighter command in the South African Air Force. I was in bomber command. You met some of these guys, for example, when we were on a day's Hafiz in Cairo. And it so happened that actually guys who were in fighter squadrons used to give us cover when we were on bombing missions. But we really didn't know the guys at that time. You know, it was just one squadron supporting a bomber squadron. But after the war, there were a number of get-togethers of guys who had served. And in the South African Zionist Federation, there was a chap by the name of Simon Weinstein. I don't know whether you heard that name. This guy was absolutely fantastic towards recruiting ex-servicemen to come over to Israel. Simon, he served in World War II. He was he wasn't really a qualified rabbi, but he served as a rabbi in the Western Desert. And then we started meeting each other and getting together. And then, you know, just to take a step forward, are you possibly aware that a guy by the name of Cecil Margot, the name is familiar to you? Yeah. Cecil was a very senior officer in the South African Air Force, and a terrific guy, a bomber pilot, and a fellow with tremendous courage. Ben-Gurion actually offered him command of the Air Force. And Cecil visited the squadrons and headquarters and so forth. And I took him to the airport when he left Israel. And he declined Ben-Gurion's offer. And I said to him, Cecil, why did you decline?
Why didn't you take it?
Yeah. Why didn't you take it? By the way, he was a very successful barrister, a lawyer. He was a very brilliant guy as well, and a fellow with tremendous charisma. And he was doing very well in his professional practice in Johannesburg. And he said to me, you know, I've interviewed so many people, not only Air Force people, but politicians. And he says, I came to the conclusion that the political impact in Israel was so great that I would not have the independence that I needed to really shape the Air Force.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And he left.
And he left.
Wow.
He didn't cut off his ties, you know, because we were training pilots in South Africa as well. And Cecil was very much interested in their progress and so on and so forth. And he felt that the Politician would not give him the independence that he really needed. They want to take some of their decisions, you know.
I want to ask you, tell me about your job as the head of the Israeli Air Force operations during the Independence War.
Yeah.
What were your authorities? What did you do in course of your job?
I was appointed as Chief of Air Operations under another South African who was the Director of the Department of Operations, Dov Yehuda, who died many years ago, who also was a lawyer and then volunteered to come over. Dov was the Director of Operations, and I was Chief of Air Operations. So we were really the planning division, as it were, of what the Air Force's next steps are going to be, depending on how the war was going on in Palestine. And so we were in constant touch with the squadrons and so forth. And here I'd like to tell you of a rather unusual situation. We had some South African guys who were working on the codes and ciphers for the Air Force. But before our codes were ready, we used to give directions over the telephone, in many cases in Afrikaans.
Your language?
Our language, because we had Afrikaans-speaking guys in headquarters and at the squadrons.
And you could guess that the Egyptians don't know.
Exactly. So I often said to myself, what are the Egyptians and the Syrians thinking? What sort of a code system is this? So our language really came to our assistance when we needed it, yeah.
The South African math.
That's right.
Inside the Israeli Air Force. Did you help the, with the planning of the bombing in Cairo with the B-17 on their way from Czech Republic to Israel on July 14th, 1948, Nabut operation?
Yeah, it was actually August, if I'm not mistaken.
July 14th. July 14th.
It was July, was it?
July 14th, for sure, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we had, that was quite an interesting event as well. We had a meeting with Aaron Renes, who was the Chief of Air Force. We decided that the flight from Czechoslovakia to Israel would be an operational mission. And we had a very interesting debate. Just to go back a step, on the 10th of June 1948, the day before the first Hafuga, we attacked Damascus. We did a night operation in a DC-3, which we borrowed from this Jewish group that I told you that flew between South Africa and Israel.
South African Dakota.
Yeah. And we took off all the civilian markings on the aircraft. And we loaded the aircraft with 16 80-kilo bombs. And you know, we had a category called the bomb chuckers. The guys who, on the small aircraft, the Bonanzas and the Oysters and so forth, we used to carry the bomb on our lap, and when we got to the target, pull the pin and drop the bomb on the enemy. That was how Haidavia started, in the most humble and modest circumstances anyone can imagine.
Even primitive.
Of course. We didn't have a single combat aircraft. The Egyptians had about 60 or 62 Spitfires and Italian Macchis. They had a significant air force. We didn't have a single combat plane or a single anti-aircraft gun in Israel. The first aircraft, Egyptian aircraft that was shot down was over Dov by a South African Machalik, Sam Rose, who shot the Spitfire down with a machine gun.
Shabbat,
and
May
that's
15th.
the one that crashed on the beach at Herzliya.
Near Acadia.
Yeah, and subsequently, you know, Haidavia put together 2 Spitfires out of scrap.
Cannibalization.
Nachon, cannibalization, exactly.
And about the Dakota
So,
bomb.
on that Dakota run, we flew over Damascus.
You were there?
Yeah, I was on that operation, and I had 24 operations in the Air Force. So I really combined my job as Chief of Air Operations as well as on operational missions. And in fact, I made it a rule that every guy who served in the operation department must fly with squadrons to familiarize themselves
Exactly
with
like
the
nowadays.
guys and the bases and the aircraft and etc. Because, you know, there were the Americans and the Canadians and the Brits and the South Africans, and, you know, they had to really try and understand the development, and it worked well that way. So on the 10th of June, what we did was, we did six runs over Damascus, each
From
run
Ramat
dropping an
David.
80-kilo bomb.
Taking off from Ramat David,
Exactly.
one of three squadron.
And, you know, and then we were very worried that they were carrying these heavy bombs that, you know, we opened the door of the aircraft to throw the bombs out there. We didn't have bomb racks at that time. And we were very much concerned that the guys wouldn't fall out together with the bomb. So we roped them together. And then they sort of had a little trolley and passed the bombs on. And then threw them out.
Together with the trolley, of course. The bomb with the trolley.
No. And then we keep the trolley for the next bomb.
For the next bomb.
That's right.
Six times?
6 rounds.
6 rounds?
Yeah. To give them the impression that we had more than one aircraft in the air. That was really the intention. Now, I really don't know how much physical damage we did, but all the foreigners left Damascus after that. They said this is no longer a healthy place.
It's dangerous for us.
So when it came to planning the trip from Czechoslovakia to Israel of the B-17s, I suggested to Aaron, if one Dakota had such a psychological impact on Damascus and the people there, just imagine 3 B-17s over Cairo. And we discussed, and he said, look, we don't know how strong the anti-aircraft defenses are. We can't risk our 3 B-17s. Now bear in mind, Al Strummer, he smuggled 4 B-17s, but one of them was captured by the FBI, and 25% of our bomber force. We had 4 and one was caught.
Small numbers.
Yeah. So we lost 25%. And that's why we decided one would go to Cairo, one would go to Gaza, and one would go to El Arish, the airfield. And, but I must say that from the moment those B-17s landed, they never stopped flying. You know, our conception was, we've got to keep our aircraft in the air to the maximum possible. And then, of course, there was the fantastic story of Air Transport Command and bringing over the Czech Messerschmitts and then the Spitfire operation.
Velveta.
Velveta, BDU. And so the aircraft, you know, developed its operating power, and the main objective was Operation Horeb, to drive the Egyptians out of the Negev into the Sinai, and then you probably know the story of the 7th of January. So that operation, you know, the war, the turn of the tide was about October 1948. Beersheba and the central Negev was liberated, Ben Dunkelman, the Canadian leader of the 7th Division, 7th Brigade. They cleared the Galil, and we sank the King Farouk, the flagship of the Egyptian Navy, commandos, some Mahmets and some Israeli guys, and the tide was turning, and we were on the offensive. And then, with the Spitfires coming through, you know, we bought the 50 Spitfires also from Czechoslovakia in August 1948. And then we had a tremendous setback. The Americans and the British put so much pressure on Czechoslovakia that they terminated the air bridge between Checo and Chelmov just after we bought the Spitfires, because we were going to do the same with the Spitfires as we did with the Messerschmitts, to disassemble them in Checo, fly them over in the C-46s and the Skymasters, reassemble them in Israel. And here, Avi, I really want to make a point which many people are entirely not aware of.
Which is?
The 29th of May, 1948.
Ad Halom.
Adal.
What is the...
You know, the Egyptians, you know, all the predictions were that the war would be over in 2 weeks. George Marshall, the American Secretary of State, said it was irresponsible and reckless to declare a state. You'll never survive. And Ernest Bevin, the British Foreign Secretary, who was really an anti-Semite, said in 2 weeks this war is over. And Montgomery, the top guy from El Alamein, he said, when the British flag is lowered over Palestine, the Jews will be extinct.
So very much pessimistic.
All of them a couple of weeks and it's over. And 29th of May was BDU 2 weeks after the state was declared.
May 14th.
Yeah. And as we said, the Egyptians had overrun the kibbutzim. We know what a wonderful defense they tried, but they had some mortars and rifles against the Egyptian tanks and armored cars and artillery. It comes the 29th of May and they're at Ashdod, 30 kilometers from Tel Aviv. And Avidan, who commanded the Israeli troops, he was in a desperate situation.
Commander of Givati Brigade.
Yeah. Trying to defend the Tel Aviv front. But he said, if the Egyptians capture Tel Aviv tomorrow and our provisional government is there, we've lost the war. He said the only thing that might save the situation is an airstrike. And by a miracle, on that afternoon towards sunset, the first 4 Messerschmitts were reassembled in Israel.
In Tel Nof, in the hangar.
Yeah. And it was done in the strictest confidence and precautions, because we wanted the element of surprise on the Egyptians. So those aircraft weren't even test flown. Their armament systems weren't even tested. And they went into action. And they only carried 2 70-kilo bombs. And they had their cannons and their machine guns. And then the attack took place on the Egyptians. And they really panicked. They were completely destabilized. In fact, the Egyptians actually even after, a few days later withdrew a bit south in order to try and reorganize themselves. But the fate of the state of Israel was on a knife's edge on the 29th of May. And that's why I say that was one of the miracles within the greater miracle of the establishment of the state and the rebirth of the Jewish people after 2,000 years. And I tell people every day, recognize the fact that you are living in a miracle.
One of the four pilots of May 29, 1948 was a South African
Eddie
guy,
Cohen.
Edward Solomon Cohen, Eddie Cohen. What can you tell us about him?
You know, I didn't know.
He lost his life.
I really didn't know him. Actually, he had come to Israel. He was a great Zionist. He had come to Israel, and I think it was on the kibbutz. And then he joined the Air Force. To my regret, I never knew him personally. And then, of course, there were the two Israelis as well, Asa Weizmann and Mordei Alon.
Lou Leonard was the leader.
And Lou,
was leading.
yeah. As a matter of fact, you probably know Danny Grossman.
Of course.
You know Danny.
Of course.
I was talking to him, and I really have quite a consistent contact with Lou's wife, with Rachel. And Danny suggested that she should be invited to Haylavir on the 16th of December. And I said that would be a wonderful idea to have her there. Because those guys, you know, there are so many factors that I say were so critical in this war. Czechoslovakia, the only country that came to our aid. Czechoslovakia. Not a single democracy. And then you had the United Nations embargo on the sale of arms to the Middle East. And then you had the American Neutrality Act. And you had the CIA and the FBI.
Many enemies.
And the British MI6. And all the United Nations observers. And look at the vision of a guy like Al Schwimmer. He says, Israel's cut off by land and by sea. The only transportation will be by air. And then he smuggled 11 C-46s out of America.
And Sky Masters and Constellation.
And the Sky Masters, and the Constellation, and the B-17. I mean, you know, if ever there is a hall of fame, those guys should be there. Al Schwimmer, Sam Pomerantz with the Spitfires.
Why did Myra, your wife, and yourself, why did you and your wife come back to South Africa? Why did you?
Yeah, there were two very good reasons. One is, we didn't want to start a family whilst I was flying there. And secondly, we had no money. I had 5 years in World War II, and then I had 2.5 years in Haylavir, and the pockets were empty. So we said, we're going back for 10 years. I'm really going to work very hard in South Africa, try and build up some capital so that when we come on Aliyah, we don't have to go to the Sokhnut for financial help and so on and so forth. And it worked out wonderfully well. We went back for 11 years. And we came on Aliyah with 4 children. And as you may know, Saul was an F-15 pilot. He was actually the youngest F-15 pilot in the world when he went on to the F-15. When, you know, Benny Pellet was a commander of the Air Force when we got the F-15s. And when Saul was selected as the junior member of the group, this guy was walking on air. He just couldn't believe it. But, and then our son Dan was on Phantoms. And we had a grandson in the Air Force. And now Myra had been trained as a meteorologist
in the Air
South
Force.
Africa.
In South Africa.
And she conducted the first course in Heilovier on meteorology for the young pilot cadets. And then some of them, like you, Rome, you know, squadron commanders and so forth. So she had, she really got her experience in the South African Air Force as well. And that is the reason why she said that she's ready to come with me to Palestine.
What year did you come back here as a family?
In '62.
And where did you started your family in Israel? Where did you start
And we
your
had
life
our
in
4,
Israel?
we came with our 4 children. We had 4 children when we came to Aliyah. And then we had a little house in a shchona in Herzliya. And Todala, you know, I went into the business that I knew.
Insurance?
Insurance, that's right. I had worked for a great company called the Sun Life of Canada, which is one of the world's top insurance companies. And I also managed a very small branch of 2 other guys, and I gave them 3 years' notice. I said, I'm going to Israel in 1962. And I had a very successful run with that company. And then we came over on Aliyah, and I continued in that field in Israel. And to Dala Ale, once again, we had a very successful business experience in Israel. We built up a fine agency. I was together with a guy, Moshe-Sgel, and we sold our company in the year 2000 to the McDonald Insurance Company. And I keep active. Even now, I get queries from some of our old companies that we looked after. They've got a question here. So at the age of 98, I still keep contact with my
it's great.
With my connection of the old days.
I want to go back to the to 1948, 1949, 1950. Tell me about the personality and about the leadership of Major General Aharon Remez. Who was Aharon Remez, and what was your relationship with him?
Yeah. You know, the start of the Air Force was really in the forefront. We didn't, firstly, we didn't have ranks, you know, initially. But people, after all, Aharon Remez is Chief of Air Force, but everybody calls him Aharon, you know. It's as though he's a friend of his. We're fighting together. I liked Aharon very much. he had got his wings in the Royal Air Force. Britain, and this is an interesting point, was very much opposed to training Palestinian Israelis for pilots courses. And there were a number, like Dan Tarkovsky was trained in South Africa. Asa Weizmann was trained in Rhodesia. But they never had operational experience because they got their wings towards the end of the war. So they never, Dan had a little bit of operational experience in Greece, in fact, in his career. And Aaron was a very smart guy. You know, I felt that these guys had to cope with pilots who had tremendous experience from World War II. Some of those pilots had 11 and 10 kills in the Air Force in World War II. You know, and here you have the Israelis, like our own, who's in the top position, but no experience of warfare, really. But I think he was a very clever guy. He was ready to accept recommendations. He had a very good rapport with the people. And take a guy like Modi along. Modi was the commanding officer of 101 Squadron. You had so many top flight pilots on that squadron. And yet this guy had the personality that all these experienced guys really respected this guy. And I mean, Modi was a wonderful pilot. You know, he first shot down the 2 bombers in his Messerschmitt.
June 3rd, 1940.
Exactly. You know, he couldn't get the undercarriage down, and he didn't want to damage the aircraft because we had only 2 Messerschmitts at that time.
Operative.
And so, you know, he shook it so vigorously, and apparently the glycol caused him to lose consciousness, apparently. Oh, so sad. What a wonderful guy he was. And there you know the story, of course, on the 7th of January, when our Air Force got entangled with the RAF.
The five British warplanes that
exactly,
were shot down.
Were shot down by our guys. Yeah.
By 101.
By 101. Yeah. 101 was really born on the 29th of May when they attacked the Egyptian army. And 100 was started when we were flying in the small aircraft, the Ulsters and the
Dragon Rapid. And
exactly. Yeah.
What is the Universal Machal Committee? World Machal Committee.
Yeah.
And what is your...
I was elected as chairman of World Machal at a convention which Machal arranged in 1968, which was the 20th anniversary. And we had some Machal organizations which were very active at that time. In Britain, there was a guy whose name you may be familiar with, Stanley Medics. a terrific guy, really a wonderful man. And he was largely responsible for the Machel monument in the Robin Forest. And he was very active. He was the head of British and Scandinavian Machel. And then we had, in America, there was Machel, they called themselves AVI, American Volunteers for Israel. Very active Machel organization. And then on the western side of the United States, they had Machel West. And in South Africa, they had a small Machel association. And so we were, you know, there were anniversaries and there were events and there was communication between us and them. And some of us in Israel really wanted to keep contact with these guys because it really was such an unusual experience going through the war. And then, you know, these guys started going back from Israel already in March 1949. Some of them were students, and some of them were in business, and some of them looking after their parents, and so on and so forth. From an historical point of view, we have one tremendous regret.
Which is?
I'll tell you. In World War II, and this is very important, Avi, and this is so important for the Jews to know, there were 1.5 million Jews who served in World War II. 1.5 million. 550,000 from the United States, 500,000 from Russia, the British Empire, the Free French, the Free Polish, the underground movements. There was no country in the world that had the same proportion of fighters as the Jewish people in World War II, and nobody knows about it. Now, I said we had 4,800 Machaniks. If we had 15,000 Machaniks, there would be no West Bank and no East Jerusalem problem today. But history doesn't forgive you. And you see, and we say, why didn't more Machaniks come? And I suppose the reason is that they were war weary after World War II. They said, we've had enough.
We've had enough.
Yeah. That's the only explanation I can give. But that could have been also such a dramatic contribution to the state of Israel if we could have solved that bloody intractable problem on the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
Difficult question. In your opinion, did the Sabras treat the Machal volunteers appropriately? The relationship.
I would say that the relationship generally was a good one. I remember when we moved Air Force headquarters from Malon Hayarkon to Jaffa.
Machane.
Yeah. And we arranged shortly after that a football game between Machaniks and the Israelis. And in the discussion, the Israeli guy was explaining this and that and the next thing, and he said, "איך אומרים go באנגלית?" I'll always remember that, "איך אומרים go באנגלית." So, look, I tell you, some of the mechanics, I think, had the feeling that maybe there could have been a little more hospitality and so forth, but it really was a very difficult situation. I understood one thing. This is going to be an Israeli Air Force, not a Machal Air Force. You know, I said in a speech that I gave in 1968, I said, you came, you fought, you conquered, and you'll always be part of the renewal of the Jewish nation and the state of Israel. And I said, you know, these guys, I don't say all of them came only out of a feeling of loyalty and brotherhood. Not all of them. Some even came as adventurers. They couldn't settle down after World War II. And some of the guys in Air Transport Command in ATC, mainly the Swedes, they were paid.
Came for money.
They came for money. They did a wonderful job. These aircraft, which were heavily laden in Czechoslovakia, flying over the Alps at night, the oxygen systems were not the best. Landing in Israel, getting rid of the cargo, all the components for the Messerschmitts, flying back, because it all had to be done by night, because the Egyptians dominated the skies in the daytime. And so, you know, there were some very fine friendships that were started. We became very friendly with Dan Tarkovsky, with Asa Weizmann, with Shlomo Lahat, with Joe Ronan, and a number of those guys. And as a matter of fact, you know, these guys also gave me a start to my business career in Israel. They were wonderful contacts. They were CEOs of companies and managing directors and so forth. And you know, we really built up a good connection through some of my Air Force contacts. So as I said, some of the guys felt that maybe there could have been more hospitality. But bear in mind, in Israel at the time, there was such tzena. You know, we were so happy to get an egg with our breakfast, with the cucumbers and bread. My wife tells a story after she was discharged from the Air Force because meteorologia went into the Ministry of Transportation. So she became a civilian and worked at the Kilia as a civilian. So then she got a ticket for food. I was in the Air Force, so I didn't. She got a ticket, and when she went to the butcher for the first day with her ticket, he took a little tin of bully beef, and he took a chopper, and he chopped it halfway. He said, because this is only for one person. And you know, she says, to see a tin of bully beef being chopped into two, this is your ration. So it was difficult times. But 101 Squadron, did you see the film
Above and Beyond? Yes.
You've seen the film, have you? As a matter of fact, I'm going to phone Nancy today. She's here now.
Nancy Spielberg.
Yeah. I think it would be very nice for her. I'll check whether she could come to the Air Force too. And so that, as you say, it's a difficult question. Mara and I were very lucky. We made some wonderful friendships.
It changed the course of your life, both of you. The decision to come to Israel in May 1948.
Yeah, of course. Oh, it was a major turning point in our life. But, you know, we had made up our mind we'd come in Aliyah. But as I said, I didn't want to have to go to the Sokhnut and get loans and assistance and so forth. So it worked out financially. We established ourselves. We said we're on our way. And it was fantastic. And all 4 children were born in South Africa. And Saul and Alice served in the Air Force, and my daughter Philippa served in the Air Force. And to Donna, much to be grateful for.
Dear Smoky, we would like to honor you for receiving the special certificate of appreciation from the IAF commander and the CEO of the IAF Association in the Fellowship Conference on December 16th, 2018. On behalf of the Israeli Air Force Museum, we wish you many more good years and strong health to your wife and yourself. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much.